An old house on the outskirts of town stood like a monument to a forgotten time. Its gray walls held secrets no one was in a hurry to unravel. It was here, in this Victorian mansion converted into a government institution, that a story unfolded that changed everything I knew about justice, mercy, and the nature of the human soul. I was 23 years old when I began working as a warden at the House of Last Resort, officially called the State Institution for the Detention of Persons Sentenced to Life Imprisonment in Minimum Security Conditions. In practice, it was a prison, albeit an unusual one. It housed not dangerous criminals, but people whose cases were complex, controversial, and often unjust. People whom society had chosen to forget. Director Harold Morgan greeted me on my first day with a cold handshake. He was a man of about 50, with graying temples and eyes that held neither warmth nor pity. He led me down a long corridor, which I would later call in my notes, the Corridor of Oblivion. Only those who understand the need for order work here, Morgan said without looking back. Sentimentality has no place here. These people have committed crimes. No matter how complex their stories, they must pay. I nodded, though something in me protested his words. I was young, ambitious, and I thought I could remain objective, fair. I was wrong. The corridor was long, almost frighteningly long. On either side were rooms, not cells in the traditional sense, but rather living quarters. Each had a small barred window and a dark wooden door. Everything was clean, almost sterile. But this cleanliness was cold, lifeless. There are 8 people here, Morgan continued. Each of them received a life sentence. Each one remains here until death. Your shift's job is to keep them safe, make sure they don't try to escape, and ensure they follow the rules. I asked why they weren't held in a regular prison. Because, Morgan replied with a thin smile, this facility is funded by a charity that believes in a humane approach. They think that giving these people a little comfort will somehow atone for their sins. Stupid, but it's their money. The first man I met was Samuel Crow. He was 72 years old and had been in the house for 20 years. His crime was horrific. He murdered his wife and her lover. But when I first saw him, I found it hard to imagine this thin old man with kind gray eyes committing such a crime. "Welcome, young man," Samuel said as I passed his room. His voice was soft, almost musical. "Are you new?" I stopped, though Morgan had already moved on. "Yes," I replied. "It's my first day." "Then let me give you some advice," Samuel said, moving closer to the window bars. "Don't believe everything you're told. Don't believe the stories you hear. And most importantly, don't lose your humanity. This place will try to take it from you, but you have to hold on." I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded and kept walking. A week after my arrival at the house, something happened that changed everything. A new prisoner was brought in. His name was Thomas Williams, and he was only 35 years old. This was unusual. Usually they brought in people who had already served part of their sentences in regular prisons. Thomas was a tall black man with a powerful build, but his eyes didn't express anger or cruelty, but deep sadness. When he was brought into the house, all the other prisoners came out of their rooms to watch. This was unusual. Usually they stayed in their rooms. Morgan placed Thomas in a room at the end of the hallway, next to Samuel's. I was on duty that evening, and I saw Thomas enter his new cell and sit on the bed without saying a word. His face was a mask of indifference, but I saw something else in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or desperation. The next day, I decided to learn more about Thomas. I found his file in Morgan's office. The story was astonishing. Thomas had been convicted of the murder of a white man, the son of a wealthy farmer. According to the official version, Thomas attacked the young man without provocation, killed him, and attempted to cover up the crime. The court found him guilty in 20 minutes. He was given a life sentence, but when I read the details, I noticed oddities. The witnesses were unclear in their testimony. Thomas's lawyer was clearly incompetent, and most importantly, there was no physical evidence linking Thomas to the crime. I asked Samuel about this during one of my rounds. "You noticed," the old man said, nodding. "Yes, Thomas's story is unfair, but justice is rare in places like this." "Why not?" "Who did nothing?" I asked. "Because he's black," Samuel answered simply. "Because his father was poor and the murdered man's father was rich. Because it was a long time ago and people have forgotten. Because the system isn't designed to admit mistakes." I started visiting Thomas. At first it was just short conversations through the bars of his door, but gradually he opened up to me. He told me about his life before prison, about his mother, who worked as a laundress, about his father, who died when Thomas was a child, about his dream of becoming a teacher. "I was in the library," Thomas said one day, "when the murder happened. I was there with a book about pedagogy. I wanted to teach children, but no one believed I was there. The library was in the black part of town, you see. No one checked. I started digging deeper. I found old newspaper articles. I contacted people who remembered the case. And gradually the picture became clear. Thomas was innocent. He had been convicted of a crime committed by someone else, perhaps the farmer's son himself, in an accident, or one of his friends. But how could I prove it? I was just a warden. I had no authority. And when I tried to tell Morgan this, he simply looked at me with disdain. "You're not here to review sentences," he said coldly. "You're here to maintain order. If you can't handle this job, I'll find someone else." But then something inexplicable happened, something that changed everything. It started with an illness. One of the employees, a woman named Elena, who worked as a nurse at the home, fell ill. The illness was strange. The doctors couldn't determine what it was. She was conscious, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't move. Her body was paralyzed, but her eyes were alive, aware. Morgan was furious. He wanted to send her to the hospital, but Elena refused. She asked to stay in the house. I didn't know why. Thomas asked to speak to me. "I can help her," he said simply. "How?" I asked, not believing my ears. "Let me see her. Just let me be near her." I knew it was against the rules, but I also knew Elena was dying, and the doctors couldn't do anything. What did I have to lose? I brought Thomas to Elena's room. Morgan was furious, but he was in town, and I knew I had time. Thomas entered the room and simply sat next to her, holding her hand. He didn't say anything. He was just there. And then a miracle happened. Elena began to breathe deeper. Her eyes closed, and she seemed to have fallen asleep. Thomas continued to sit next to her, holding her hand. An hour passed, then 2. I stood in the doorway, watching, not believing what I was seeing. When Elena woke up, she could speak, she could move. Her paralyzed body had come back to life. The doctors were shocked. They couldn't explain what had happened. They talked about spontaneous remission and miraculous recovery. But I knew the truth. I saw it with my own eyes. After this event, the attitude towards me in the house changed. The other guards began to look at me with suspicion. Morgan became colder, more hostile. He knew I had allowed Thomas to break the rules, but he couldn't prove it. Elena refused to tell what had happened. She simply smiled and said it was a miracle. But the strangest thing was that after this event, The other prisoners began to treat Thomas differently. They looked at him with awe, almost fear. Even Samuel, who was wise and calm, seemed to know something about Thomas that I didn't. I began asking the other prisoners about Thomas. Gradually, the story unfolded. Thomas was an extraordinary man. He possessed an ability no one could explain. He could heal people. Not magically, not supernaturally, but in some way that transcended scientific understanding. When he touched a person, illnesses retreated, wounds healed, pain disappeared. This explained why he was placed in the house instead of a regular prison. It explained why he was guarded so strictly. It explained why all the other prisoners looked at him with such strange expressions. But it didn't explain why he was convicted of murder. I asked Samuel about this. Because people fear what they don't understand, the old man said. Thomas was a young man when the murder occurred. He was already showing signs of his abilities. People began to notice that when he was around, sick people recovered. It frightened them. But that doesn't explain the murder, I said. No, Samuel agreed. The murder was simply a convenient pretext, a way to get rid of a man who was too dangerous, too unusual. They framed him for the murder because it was a way to imprison him, where his abilities couldn't help people. I was shocked. It wasn't just injustice. It was a conspiracy. The system didn't just make a mistake. The system deliberately condemned an innocent man, Kay. I decided to take action. I started gathering evidence. I contacted a lawyer who agreed to help. I found witnesses who remembered Thomas being in the library on the day of the murder. I gathered everything I could. But Morgan was faster. Morgan called me into his office one cold November day. His face was grim, almost black with rage. "You're playing a dangerous game, young man," he said, not inviting me to sit. "You're gathering information on prisoners. You're talking to lawyers. You're trying to overturn convictions." "Because the system is unfair," I replied, feeling my heart beat faster. "Thomas is innocent. I can prove it." "Thomas is guilty because the court found him guilty," Morgan said coldly. "And you, young man, are breaking the rules. You allowed him to see Elena. You violated security protocol. You put people's lives in danger." "I saved a life," I said. "You meddled in matters that were none of your business," Morgan replied. "And now you must suffer the consequences." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the corridor below. "I'm firing you," he said without looking back. "You will no longer work in this house. You will no longer bother these people. And if you try anything with the information you've gathered, I'll make sure you're charged with conspiracy and aiding a prisoner in escaping. Do you understand?" I understood. I was trapped. But then something happened I didn't expect. The night of the day Morgan fired me, there was a rebellion. It started quietly. The prisoners simply refused to return to their rooms after dinner. They stood in the corridor, silent, looking at us. Morgan was furious. He ordered the police called, but then Thomas stepped forward. "We won't resist," he said calmly. "We just want you to know we're here. We want you to see us. We want you to hear us." Morgan was furious. "Get back to your rooms," he shouted, "or I'll order the guards to use force." But the guards didn't move. I could see that even the guards were shaken. They saw Thomas, saw his calm, saw the other prisoners supporting him. They saw the justice in his words. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but they weren't prepared for what they found. They found 8 people standing in the hallway, silent, unarmed, unthreatening. They found guards who didn't know what to do. They found a director who was furious but powerless. And they found a young man, me, standing next to Thomas. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I believed in justice. Maybe because I saw Thomas as something more than just a prisoner. Maybe because I realized my duty wasn't to the system, but to the truth. I stood next to Thomas, and the other guards did the same. The police were confused. They didn't know what to do. They couldn't use force against peaceful protesters. They couldn't arrest guards who sided with the prisoners. Morgan was forced to back down. He was forced to allow Thomas's lawyer into the house. He was forced to allow a retrial. Thomas's retrial took 3 months. Those were long, difficult months. But in the end, the truth prevailed. New evidence showed that Thomas was indeed in the library on the day of the murder. The witnesses I found confirmed this. Thomas's lawyer uncovered documents that showed the original investigation was biased and incomplete. The court found Thomas not guilty. He was allowed to leave the home, but Thomas didn't leave. Instead, he stayed. He said he wanted to help other prisoners who had been wrongfully convicted. He said he wanted to use his abilities for good. Morgan was fired. He was replaced by a new director, a woman named Maria Santos, who believed in reform and justice. She allowed Thomas to work at the home as a consultant. She allowed me to stay and help review the cases of other prisoners. One by one, we began to uncover injustices. Samuel, an elderly man who had murdered his wife and her lover, was retried. New evidence showed his wife was a victim of domestic violence, and Samuel acted in self-defense. He was allowed to be paroled. Other prisoners also received justice. Not everyone was fully exonerated, but everyone received a fair review of their cases. The system began to function as it should have from the beginning. Part 8, Transformation. The House of Final Resort was transformed. It was no longer a place of oblivion. It became a place of hope. A place where justice could prevail. A place where people could get a second chance. Thomas remained there, working as a counselor. His healing abilities were recognized, and he used them to help people who had been wounded by the system. But he also did something more important. He helped people heal psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. I stayed there, too. I became the director of the case review program. I dedicated myself to finding injustices and righting them. But the most important change occurred in the people who worked at the house. They began to see prisoners not as criminals, but as people. They began to understand that the system was flawed, and that their duty was not simply to follow the rules, but to seek justice. But progress came at a price. Morgan didn't disappear. He found work at another facility, in another city. He continued to spread his philosophy of cold, ruthless justice. And other people who believed in his methods began to work against us. They filed complaints against Thomas, saying his abilities were unnatural and dangerous. They tried to close the house, saying it was too lenient on prisoners. They tried to undo the reviews we'd conducted, but they couldn't, because people began to believe in justice. People began to see that the system was flawed. People began to demand change, and Thomas became a symbol of that change. His story spread across the country. People learned about a man who had been wrongfully convicted, a man with the power to heal, a man who chose justice over freedom. The years passed. I grew old, as did Thomas. But our work continued. We reviewed hundreds of cases. We freed people who had been wrongfully convicted. We helped people who had been wounded by the system. We showed that justice is possible if we're willing to fight for it. Thomas never left the house. He could have left. He could have lived freely, but he chose to stay. He chose to help people in the same situation he was in. He chose to use his powers for good. And I stayed with him. I stayed because I believed in what we were doing. I stayed because I saw how justice could change lives. I stayed because I met a man who taught me that true strength lies not in following rules, but in doing what's right. When I wrote this story, I was already in my 80s. Thomas was even older, but his eyes still shone with the same kindness, the same compassion I saw on the first day he arrived at the house. I asked him once why he stayed. "Because it's right," he answered simply. "Because people need justice. Because I can't live with my conscience knowing that other people suffer the same injustice I suffered." That was his answer. That was his philosophy. That was his legacy. Now, as I write these final words, I realize that Thomas's story is not just the story of one man. This is a story about a system that was broken. This is a story about people who were willing to fight for justice, even when it was dangerous. This is a story about how change is possible if we're willing to fight for it. The House of Final Resort no longer exists in its original form. It has been transformed into a justice center, a place where people can get a fair review of their cases, where people can heal from the wounds the system has inflicted on them. Thomas died at the age of 92, peacefully, in his sleep. His funeral was enormous. The people he helped, the people he saved, the people he inspired, came to honor him. I was there, in the front row, crying. I cried not because he died, but because I knew his work was complete. He left behind a legacy of justice, a legacy of hope, a legacy of love. And I will continue his work. I will continue to fight for justice. I will continue to help people who have been wounded by the system. I will continue to believe that change is possible. Because I met a man named Thomas Williams, and he taught me that justice isn't just a word. Justice is an action. Justice is a choice. Justice is our responsibility to each other. And that's what I will remember as long as I live.